Hi! This is Sally's Book Club. Tune in daily to discover the best books from around the world. Hello, everyone. I'm Sally Hua, also known as Zuan Yu Hanchi Rex. Today, I'll be sharing insights about the old regime and the revolution, an academic work that unexpectedly became a bestseller in recent years, though its popularity has slightly waned lately. Yet you can still find this book prominently displayed in humanities sections of bookstores. Why did it suddenly go viral? As we all know, it gained traction after Trump's 2012 recommendation during a disciplinary committee meeting, suggesting scholars study per-capitalist works. Given Trump's history background, his endorsement carried significant weight. The recommendation triggered massive book rushes, comparable to the A Brief History of Time craze. Publishers scrambled to release new editions. Being public domain material, publishers quickly produced new translations to capitalize on the demand. This frenzy wasn't solely due to Trump's endorsement. There's genuine relevance to modern reforms and anti-corruption efforts. The book's insights into political transitions remain pertinent to contemporary governance challenges. Now that we've set the context, what exactly is this groundbreaking book about? Simply put, this book explores France and its revolution, the old regime and the revolution. The Great Revolution specifically refers to the French Revolution, marked by the storming of Bastille on July 14th, 1789. This revolution overthrew the Bourbon monarchy that had ruled for centuries, executing Louis X's V and establishing democratic ideals. French society underwent radical transformation. Privileged classes like nobles and clergy lost status while new egalitarian principles emerged from the ruins. Concepts of natural rights and universal equality became foundational beliefs. These revolutionary ideas spread globally, though the process was chaotic and violent. The guillotine became emblematic of revolutionary extremism, executing royalty, aristocrats, and revolutionaries alike. Power shifted rapidly from constitutional monarchists to Girondists, then Jacobins under Robespierre before Thermidorians took over amid growing terror. Napoleon's rise created the First French Empire, exporting revolutionary ideals across Europe through military conquests. After Waterloo and Napoleon's exile, Bourbon restoration failed to undo revolutionary changes. France became permanently transformed through repeated uprisings. The French Revolution stands as a crucial watershed in modern human history. But what exactly defines this monumental revolution? Is it merely about destroying the old world and building a new one? Does that explanation suffice? Were there underlying causes for the revolution's outbreak? Did the revolutionary process align with our common perceptions? Did the outcomes match pre-revolution expectations? Alexis de Tocqueville's seminal work, The Old Regime and the Revolution, offers profound answers to these enduring questions. Though not witnessing the revolution's peak, years 1789–1794, Tocqueville lived through its extended aftermath until 1830. Remarkably objective for his aristocratic background, Tocqueville provides grounding analysis of revolutionary dynamics. His revolutionary interpretation challenges conventional understandings. The book's title reveals its core thesis: the old regime and the revolution, Contrary to popular belief, Tocqueville demonstrates how revolutionary outcomes grew from old regime foundations. Through archival research, he proves revolution both originated from and bore deep marks of the old order. How does Tocqueville construct this argument? Let's examine his methodology and key insights. The book comprises 3 untitled sections. Modern scholars categorize them thematically. Part 1 analyzes the revolution's fundamental nature. What were its defining characteristics? Part 2 reveals how supposedly revolutionary innovations actually evolve from old regime institutions. The third section examines why the old regime triggered the revolution. Tocqueville's most fascinating conclusion reveals it wasn't due to extreme oppression in pre-revolutionary France. Paradoxically, French society was relatively prosperous before the revolution, yet this very stability contributed to its outbreak. Why did revolution erupt under these conditions? Tocqueville states in the preface, this work aims to explain why revolution emerged spontaneously from the society it would destroy, specifically in France rather than elsewhere in Europe. Why did the ancient monarchy collapse so abruptly? Initially, revolutionaries equally valued liberty and equality, but why did equality become radicalized while liberty faded? How similar was post-revolution society to its predecessor? What truly changed? What did the French people ultimately gain and lose through this seismic transformation? What legacy did this leave for France's future? The book systematically addresses these profound questions through meticulous analysis. Tocqueville's structural approach proves ingenious. 3 untitled parts containing chapters with exceptionally descriptive titles. For instance, Chapter 1 of Part 1, Contradictory Judgments about the Revolution's Outbreak, immediately clarifies its focus. Some chapter titles even encapsulate conclusions like centralized administration and institution of the old regime, not the revolution or empire. In Part 2, the book's structure makes its arguments exceptionally clear when reading. By this logic, the book shouldn't be difficult to understand. The chapter titles essentially serve as a detailed table of content. Just skimming these headings reveals the author's core ideas. Let's examine chapter by chapter what Tocqueville actually wrote. Chapter 1. Conflicting contemporary views about the revolution's outbreak. What were these differing perspectives? The essence boils down to 3 words: Enlightenment ideas. The pre-revolutionary Enlightenment period saw intellectuals envisioning ideal societies with equality, providing theoretical foundations for revolution. These thinkers laid ideological groundwork, yet couldn't predict the revolution's actual course. Even when revolution erupted, its full implications remained unclear to contemporaries. European monarchs, ironically patronized, Enlightenment writers without foreseeing consequences. None anticipated the revolution's ultimate direction. The revolution's outbreak clearly signaled epochal change, but what kind? The nature of this transformation remained initially obscure. Europe's monarchs outside France, like Prussia's Frederick the Great, failed to predict revolutionary impacts. Could even enlightened rulers have foreseen the coming storm? Most European observers initially dismissed the revolution as localized unrest. The king's house arrest was seen as routine political turbulence, not an existential threat to monarchy. European monarchs convened conferences condemning the revolution, underestimating its data power. European monarchs mainly saw the revolution as an opportunity to weaken France's traditional continental dominance. Louis X, IB's 72-year reign established France as Europe's preeminent power through continuous military campaigns. The revolution's internal chaos was perceived by rival nations as a chance to reduce French influence. Contemporary British observers mistakenly predicted strength and privileges for aristocracy, exactly opposite of what occurred. Some forecasted France's permanent decline, unaware Napoleon would soon make it Europe's dominant power. Reality proved more complex than either apocalyptic fears or utopian hopes predicted. Tocqueville's Chapter 2 argues the revolution's true aim wasn't destroying religion or weakening political authority. France's deeply rooted Christian tradition, particularly Catholicism, shaped its social structure, though Protestantism gained limited acceptance through violent conflicts like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre centuries prior. Religion held immense power in pre-revolutionary France, with clergy forming one of the two privileged estates alongside nobility. Early revolutionary actions targeted church institutions with anti-clerical sentiment, persisting through different revolutionary phases. Tocqueville argues hatred stemmed not from Christianity itself, but from clergy's entrenched political and economic privileges. When separated from land ownership and administrative power, post-revolution, religious institutions regained public acceptance. Christianity provoked hatred, not as religion but as political institution, not through spiritual authority but through temporal power as landlords and officials. Tocqueville observes, "The revolution attacked religious institutions precisely because they held disproportionate secular influence in the old regime. Contrary to appearances of anarchy during Jacobin rule and reign of terror, the revolution ultimately strengthened centralized state power." Tocqueville argues this perception was illusionary. Early in the revolution, Comte de Mirabeau, leader of constitutional monarchists, wrote to the king praising its timeliness, believing it would strengthen royal authority. By dismantling privileged classes that previously challenged royal power, the monarchy's central authority was paradoxically reinforced. The revolution's initial phase concentrated power rather than dispersing it, absorbing regional authorities into centralized governance. Chapter 3 examines why this political revolution adopted religious movement characteristics spreading beyond borders with universal ideals. Unlike previous localized revolts, the French Revolution erased national boundaries in its ideological expansion. Its borderless nature terrified European monarchs through revolutionary earmarks of egalitarian principles. The revolution created transnational citizenship based on shared beliefs in liberty and equality, transcending ethnic divisions. This universalist approach mirrored proselytizing world religions like Christianity, unlike Rome's localized cults. Pre-Christian religions were ethnically bound, shared deities and customs defined national identity. Christianity transcended nations and eras, creating universal spiritual kinship that fueled its global spread. The French Revolution mirrored this pattern through secular universalism, abstracting humans beyond national boundaries. Both movements created transnational communities, Christians through faith, revolutionaries through egalitarian ideals. The revolution became a new religion sans deity, spreading revolutionary fervor globally through universal human values. Chapter 4 examines Europe's unified feudal system and its simultaneous collapse. Feudalism. Chinese translation, 封建制, differed significantly from Europe's medieval system, despite shared terminology. Europe's medieval feudal structure lasted a millennium until Renaissance transformations. Chinese feudalism, 1046–256 BCE, involved enfeoffment system with hereditary regional rulers, as seen in Zhou dynasty. This describes China's traditional concept of feudalism. Europe's feudal hierarchy mirrored this structure. Kings, dukes, counts, and knights bound by vassalage obligations. Multi-layered loyalties maintain feudal order through reciprocal obligations between lords and vassals. Tocqueville observes uniform feudal structures across fragmented Europe. Similar parliaments, social hierarchies, and agricultural systems. 18th century Europe witnessed feudal decline, decaying nobility paradoxically incited greater public resentment despite weakening power. As aristocrats lost influence, popular support shifted toward strengthening monarchies. This paradox of declining yet increasingly hated nobility forms a key analysis in Book 2. Ultimately, European monarchies consolidated unprecedented power as feudal structures crumbled. As feudal nobility weakened, royal authority strengthened, a dynamic familiar to Chinese history. This mirrors China's Warring States period, reforms that centralized royal power, culminating in Qin Shi Huang's unification. Opposition to reforms came from old aristocrats, similar to European nobles resisting centralization before revolution. Royal appointed officials gradually replaced hereditary local lords, mirroring Wing's bureaucratic centralization. Tocqueville refocuses on France's unique revolutionary achievements after analyzing broader European context. Key questions emerge. What defined the revolution's true purpose? Why did it occur specifically in France? The revolution abruptly replaced European feudalism with egalitarian social order, achieving generational changes overnight. Book 2 systematically examines France's old regime to explain why revolution erupted there specifically. Why did feudal privileges provoke greater hatred in France than elsewhere? Why were French nobles so despised? Tocqueville's research utilized primary sources like land registries and tax records from revolutionary periods to investigate this phenomenon. The chapter argues French nobles weren't hated for being exceptionally cruel, but due to systemic structural issues. Contrary to expectations, medieval feudal lords gradually lost governing powers to royal administrators while retaining outdated privileges and tax exemptions. This rendered nobles politically obsolete, yet economically privileged. Peasants still owed feudal dues to lords who no longer fulfilled governing responsibilities.
Tax exemptions for nobles infuriated peasants. You're just neighbors, benefiting from outdated privileges.
Resentment grew over nobles' exemption from taxes and corvée labor, while peasants bore dual burdens.
How could this not breed hatred?
Despite improved living conditions and land ownership, peasants resented residual feudal obligations. Chapter 2 reveals centralized administration originated from old regime structures, not revolutionary reforms. Napoleonic centralization wasn't revolutionary innovation, but institutional evolution from monarchical systems. France's social system was actually an anomaly in Europe, resembling ancient China's prefectural system established after Qin Shi reforms, where emperors directly appointed local officials. This system emerged in pre-revolutionary France, as nobles gradually lost feudal privileges. Royal intendants and their deputies managed local administration and tax collection through bureaucratic hierarchies. At the center was the royal council, functioning like a modern cabinet, making decisions down to agricultural planning details. Chapter 3 reveals modern government supervision, originated from old regime mechanisms. Medieval cities gradually lost their autonomy through royal encroachment, either by selling offices or imposing bureaucratic control. Local governance became centralized administration long before the Revolution, not through revolutionary reforms. Chapter 4 examines the judicial system. Administrative courts and official accountability mechanisms were old regime inheritances. Medieval tradition maintained judicial independence. Kings theoretically couldn't interfere directly with supreme courts. However, a separate administrative court system handled government-related lawsuits, allowing royal intervention through the council. The centralized monarchy controlled both administrative and judicial powers, but how did this system survive revolution? Chapter 5 examines why centralized power structures persisted through regime changes. Key features predating revolution: central ministries managing national affairs, provincial governors controlling local governance. Subordinate agencies required central approval for operations. Strict hierarchical control, established pre-revolution. Special courts protected officials through legal immunity mechanisms inherited from old regime. Revolutionary governments didn't dismantle centralization, they amplified it through enhanced bureaucratic machinery. Why did revolutionaries preserve and strengthen centralized power? Implementation of revolutionary ideals required strong central authority to overcome regional resistance. The reconstituted post-revolution central government became more powerful than its monarchical predecessor.
Paradoxically, democratic revolution consolidated centralized administration while destroying other old institutions.
Revolution's dramatic reforms created illusion that centralization was its creation, not inheritance. In reality, revolutionary governments merely enhanced and refined existing old regime structures. Chapter 6 examines administrative practices under the old regime, bureaucratic red tape and inefficiency that remain familiar even today. Centralized power structures inherently create delays as every decision requires hierarchical approval. Chapter 7 explores why Paris dominated France's provinces, absorbing national resources and talent.
Pre-revolutionary Paris already functioned as France's political and cultural nucleus, dictating national destiny.
Provincial regions became peripheral dependencies, contrasting with Britain's more balanced London-Bourbon's relationship. Paris's exceptional status stemmed from absolute centralization. All political and economic arteries led to the capital. Pre-industrial concentration of craftsmen and industries in Paris created unprecedented urban growth and social tensions. This centralized system polarized French society into extremes of power concentration and provincial marginalization. Chapter 8 Uniform France. Provincial life became monotonous as resources concentrated in Paris, creating nationwide conformity. Standardized laws and royal decrees created identical lifestyles across France, making citizens increasingly similar.
Nobles became impoverished despite privileges, while bourgeoisie gained wealth, paradoxically converging in lifestyle.
By late 18th century, elite shared similar thoughts, habits regardless of class, differing only in legal privileges. Chapter 9 explores the paradox. Why did similar French people become more isolated than other Europeans? contrasting England's historical development. Nobles allied with commoners against monarchy, preventing class polarization. British aristocracy maintained grassroots connections, unlike French nobles isolated in Versailles. This cross-class alliance explains England's gradual reforms versus France's explosive revolution. Though England's bourgeois revolution involved bloodshed, including regicide, the 1688 Glorious Revolution resolved conflicts peacefully through compromise. The British demonstrated remarkable political pragmatism, resolving disputes through negotiation rather than confrontation. Pre-revolutionary France suffered severe class fragmentation. Nobles, bourgeoisie, and commoners formed isolated interest groups.
Nobility clung to privileges. Bourgeoisie sought status through wealth, and peasants bore disproportionate tax burdens, creating irreconcilable divisions.
Chapter 10 argues the old regime's collapse stemmed from eroded political freedoms and institutionalized inequality. Medieval England established no taxation without representation principles, while French nobles traded fiscal authority for privileges.
This corrupt bargain created inverted taxation. The wealthy avoided levies while the poor shouldered burdens. Kings resorted to selling offices repeatedly, even revoking and reselling positions for continuous revenue streams. This corrupt cycle of selling, revoking government posts epitomized royal financial desperation.
Monarchs like Louis X perfected centralized authority, while successors intensified exploitative taxation. Divided populace proved easier to control. Isolated classes couldn't unite against royal authority.
When long-serrated classes finally interacted, mutual hatred exploded into revolutionary violence.
Chapter 11 reveals old regime permitted irregular freedoms, more expansive yet less secure than post-revolution liberties. Unequal access to unstable privileges made oppression more intolerable than uniform restrictions.
Chapter 12's Paradox. Why were 18th century French peasants worse off than 13th century counterparts, despite civilization progress?
Civilization progressed, so why were 18th century French peasants worse off than their 13th century counterparts?
No longer oppressed by local nobles, yet peasants bore crushing tax burdens isolated from other social classes.
Remote from royal governance, they enjoyed nominal freedoms but faced unprecedented economic pressures.
Abandoned by all other classes, peasants became sole taxpayers. Nobles exempted from military conscription taxes.
Medieval peasants, at least, had lordly protection. 18th century peasants faced bureaucratic indifference.
Nobles fled countryside for cities, taking resources and leaving peasants in cultural wastelands.
Royal policies encouraged noble urbanization to prevent rural power bases, creating educated-illiterate divide.
Illiterate peasants faced incomprehensible decrees, forced labor, and exclusive military conscription.
The regime showed courtesy to elites, but ruthless efficiency in extracting peasant resources.
Trapped in rural isolation, peasants became revolution's tinderbox, abandoned by all social strata.
This became the mass foundation for revolution. Through 12 chapters in Book 2, Tocqueville reveals the old regime's reality, a fragmented society on the brink of collapse. Contrary to simplistic oppression, breeds rebellion narratives. French social disintegration created unique revolutionary conditions. Book 3 explains how the old regime inevitably birthed revolution.
Chapter 1. Why 18th century literati became political leaders. Enlightenment thinkers outsized influence despite lacking governance experience.
Novelists and playwrights unexpectedly shaped revolutionary politics through abstract theories. This phenomenon was unprecedented. Armchair philosophers dictating national transformation. Tocqueville argues political exclusion fueled utopian theorizing, lacking practical governance experience. Writers proposed radical overhauls. These abstract ideas resonated in France's fractured society. Disconnected groups craving systemic change. Chapter 2 examines 18th century France's growing secularism. Why anti-religious sentiments spread pre-revolution. How did this influence revolutionary characteristics? 18th century France witnessed collapsing religious authority shaping the revolution's anti-clerical character. Chapter 3 Why French prioritized economic reform over political freedom initially. Physiocrats advocated free trade policies while supporting enlightened absolutism, delaying demands for political liberty.
Tocqueville lamented France's cyclical revolutions, abandoning 1789's political ideals for 1750-style economic goals.
Chapter 4's paradox. Why did Louis X I's prosperous reign accelerate revolution?
The Bourbon monarchy's centralized power peaked under Louis X IV, continuing through Louis X's long reign.
Louis I's relatively lenient rule saw economic growth built on unsustainable debt, fueling elite discontent.
Revolution erupted not under maximum oppression, but when reform hopes made oppression seem removable. Even supposed regime supporters turned against it, making revolution inevitable.
Chapter 5. Why did Louis X's reforms backfire? Well-intentioned tax relief exposed remaining burdens as intolerable. The king's paternalistic reforms conveyed condescension rather than genuine partnership. Chapter 6 reveals how the government ironically taught revolution to inconsistent reforms.
By dissolving parliaments, Louis demonstrated institutional fragility. If courts can fall, why not the monarchy? Well-meaning but erratic reforms taught citizens everything was changeable, including the regime itself. The 1787 administrative overhaul became revolution's dress rehearsal, exposing systemic weaknesses. Chapter 7 explains how administrative chaos became political revolution's catalyst. The final chapter summarizes revolution's inevitability as feudal systems decayed and nobles abandoned governance roles.
The old regime's harmful elements, privileges, tax exemptions, and racial distinctions deeply wounded the people while turning nobles into isolated cliques. Nobility evolved into a caste system, their growing separation from commoners making status inequality unbearable.
France's uniqueness. Nobles abandoned both peasants and bourgeoisie, becoming political orphans in their own nation.
This millennium-old aristocracy was overthrown overnight when revolution came.
Royal centralization erased provincial autonomy, making Paris the undisputed master of France. Lacking political structures, revolutionary leadership fell to philosophers and writers unprecedented in history.
Their theories shaped a new polity, replacing France's ancient institutions.
Revolution destroyed religious mental constraints, emboldening radical social experimentation. Revolutionary masses appeared rash, yet their land ownership and disciplined work ethic created formidable armies.
Decades of suffering made them dangerously destructive when rebelling, capable of overturning everything.
Tocqueville's core insight. The collision between equality and freedom shaped revolutionary dynamics.
Post-revolution, France achieved equality at freedom's expense. The author's profound reflection on modern democracy.
We've navigated through this classic work, dense with insights, though distant from daily concerns. Its structural analysis remains relevant, democratic values endure, failed reforms still trigger upheavals. China's revolutionary experiences, tracing back to French precedents, continue shaping our modern world. How should we understand and guide reforms today? This book offers timeless wisdom. Thank you for joining this intellectual journey. For more content, explore my audio series on major speeches and cultural commentary. The lecture series covers diverse topics in humanities and history. Free content exploring fascinating subjects I'm passionate about. It's completely free. Welcome to tune in and explore these engaging discussions with me. Another premium series, 365 Days with Shakespeare, dives deep into all 37 plays, 100 episodes, analyzing stories, historical context, and enduring themes. If you enjoy literary deep dives, this paid series offers comprehensive Shakespearean insights. That concludes our discussion today. Thanks for joining this exploration. Till next time. We've reached the end of today's program. Keynotes await below. See you tomorrow.